In this video, we're going to talk about working with Visual Studio, including the basics of designing a form, the properties of the objects that you will put on that form, and handling events for those objects. So we're going to start with a basic project. This one is named Windows Application. In the Solution Explorer up here, you can see the name of your project, and then your first form that it starts by default, Form 1. We're going to go ahead and start with looking at the toolbox, which is where you're going to find your controls or objects to place onto your form. By default, the toolbox will be here on the left-hand side. If you don't see it there or you can't find it, you can go to View and then Toolbox. That'll bring your toolbox up. This little pen button will dock the screen onto the left-hand side. In your toolbox, you'll have several categories of controls or objects you can place onto your form. The All Windows forms will contain all of the controls that are in each of these categories. Common controls is exactly that, common controls that you'll use. It may not be all of them, but it's at least a good chunk of them. So we'll start by placing a button on the form. If you hold down your left mouse button and drag it over, that'll place a button. Now, a button is usually a control where someone can click on it and cause something to happen. So it's usually going to be something that drives activity in our program. Then we're going to go ahead and place labels. So here's one label, here's a second label, and here's a third label. And notice each one of these, label 1, label 2, and label 3. Now what we see is the text property. So we're going to go ahead and look at properties. On label 1, if you go over here to the right-hand side, there's the Properties window. It shows you which control you're currently working with, so you can select multiple ones if you wanted to work with the button or each one of the labels. We'll start with label 1. Now the text of part of the property is what's displayed on your form by default. So for label 1, let's change it to My Text. And that changes the text. Now let's go look at the name property of your label. Now, it defaulted down to text, but if you notice, this is sorted by category. To make it easier to find name or any property you're wanting to look for, you can click on this A to Z, and that'll sort it alphabetically. So if we scroll all the way up to the top, we have name. Now, this is the name that is used in your code when you want to refer to this control. So right now, it's label 1. Let's change this to My Label. When I change this, it changes the properties window to say My Label, because that's what you're working with. But it does not change the text that is displayed, because they are two distinctly different properties. Another property we want to look at is auto size. Right now, the label sizes itself based on the content of what's in it. We can change auto size to false, which will allow us to change the size of the label. So we'll go ahead and make that a bit of a box here. And we'll do that for each of these. Label 2, so the name, label 2, and that's what we're working with. Change auto size to false. Now let's work with label 3. Choose label 3, auto size to false. Each one of these we can now size the label for how big we want it to be. Now you can't really see the borders of these, so we'll look at the border property, which will allow us to kind of distinguish where each of these are. Now I'm not seeing the border property, but I notice it's set back to Form 1. If you see here, it's got the Form 1 highlighted the entire thing, instead of the label we're wanting to look at. So we can click on this label, changes this to My Label, and now we can see border style. Right now there's no border style. Let's change that to Fixed 3D. Go ahead and click off of there. And notice there is now a border all the way around the label, so we can kind of distinguish its size, and it sets it back to highlight what's there in that section. So let's set the other two labels to the same thing. We have label 2, and we'll go to border style, set this to Fixed 3D, and label 3, border style, Fixed 3D. So each of these, well, they're slightly different size. We can go ahead and change that where they're about the same size. And the next property we want to look at is the font of the text that's in the label. So on label 3, or at label 3, let's go look for font. Under font, this is our current font. If you click on the button with 3 dots in it, it'll bring up this window. You can choose what font you want. We're going to go ahead and set this to Modern Number 20, make it bold, and 16 point. You can also do strikeout or underline just like you would if you're working with Microsoft Word or any other word processing. Hit OK. Now Label 3 has a larger font, it's the bigger point, and it has the different font style. You can also change the color. So if we change the color of this, it's now a light blue. So this is how you work with the properties of each of your controls. Now the last thing we want to look at is how to handle events. So button 1, like I said earlier, usually drives action in your program. So if somebody clicks button 1 when your program is running, then something should happen. Right now we're on properties over here, but you can also go from properties to events. So we have the control you select and go to events. And we want to handle click because usually when you see a button, you're going to click on it to drive the action. If you drop this down, there's currently nothing in there. You can double click here, and that's going to bring you to the code, which will show private sub button 1 click. So when someone clicks on button 1, it's going to do this. That handles the click for button 1. So going back to our design page, we could also set up, say, my label, and we want to handle the click event. So someone clicks on the label, it's going to happen here. We could look at button 1 click, or we can define our own. If you double click here, that's going to start a new one. Private sub my label click handles when someone clicks on the label named my label, then it's going to execute whatever code is inside of here. Another way you can get to this from the design page, on the button, if you highlight this or click on it, and double click on it, it'll bring you to whatever is currently happening with that click. So this is where you look at the event, what's happening. It handles click of button 1. And one last way to get to new events for this in your code, so when you're looking at the code page, you can choose which control you want to write code for. So right now we're on button 1 and click. If we wanted to change this to something else, say enter, we can choose enter, and button 1 enter handles when someone enters button 1. And you can write your code when something happens here.